Hello, Kat Koppett.
Hello. How you doing, Taylor?
I'm swell, and I'm really excited to be speaking with you, a professional improviser, a artist, a theatrical background, a podcaster. I will let you describe however you identify yourself, please.
That's pretty good. I guess I'm a performing improviser and an applied improviser is the shortest way to say it. Meaning that we have a theater here. A couple of years ago, we bought an old firehouse and turned it into a theater. So we have a performing space that we do all sorts of improv in. And then we take the tools and principles of improv and mash them up with more traditional organizational development tools and techniques and bring them out to the world and apply them to life and whatever objectives and intentions people have in the world.
Improv is all about speaking and listening. When I came to you and asked you to reflect on this call about speaking and listening, what did you start thinking about?
Well, you're spot on. That is, in fact, what improv is all about. In fact, that's all we've got, right? Is we have no script. We haven't planned anything. So we just start by paying attention. And I think people misunderstand that sometimes with improv. They think that what improvisers do is being clever or being especially interesting or creative. And in fact, it's the opposite. The superpower of the improviser is an ability to listen well, to pay attention and be able to receive in a way that that is more exercised than your average schmo. And in fact, I think that's why people come to us to help them in their organizations or in their lives or as coaches, is because improv is the gym for exercising your paying attention muscles, your listening muscles, and your speaking muscles in various ways, right? That there are a whole slew of muscles that we exercise. It was interesting when you say, what did I think of when you asked me to talk about it? What I realized was I'm resistant in a strange way when people ask me to speak formally to doing that. Like as a keynote speaker, very recently, I was given an award locally, and I had to give a speech, right? I was asked to give a 2-minute speech to accept this award. And I want to say I couldn't do it, which is of course not true. I could have given a 2 or 3 minute speech very easily. In our improv shows, we get up and talk for 2 or 3 minutes. And I do storytelling shows where I speak for 10 minutes at a time, just standing on stage. So it's not that I can't do that, but what's much more interesting to me, and what I always maybe subversively want to do when asked to give a keynote speech, is to make it interactive. And that's in fact what I did. I spent 30 seconds speaking, and then I said, now I'm going to make you do an activity where you speak to each other. So I think in the speaking, listening combination, even in the setting of a formal keynote, even when I'm doing TEDx talks, it's the listening part that's really exciting to us. It's the combination, the co-creation of listening and speaking that is delightful and exciting and inspiring to us as improvisers and to me as a coach.
Can I ask you to unpack the term co-creation? It's something that's often used in the storytelling field, and it's one of those words that I think gets bandied about without people pausing to think about it. So can we pause here and have you?
What a great Great, great question. I think our stories and our messages can get reified, if that's not too jargony a word. What I mean by it is we can get stuck, they can get rote, they can get habitual, or they can get self-referential and myopic. And if we are co-creating, in my mind, what I mean by it is I am connected to my partner and I am receiving as much as I'm giving. So my story is affected by the person I'm telling it to. And that can be happening in real time, in the moment. I'm paying attention to you, you're nodding your head. So I'm saying, oh, this is making sense to her. That means I can move on, or it means she likes the way I'm telling it. I'll expand on that, right? I'm affected by, or, oh, she's tilting her head and looking inquisitive. That must mean I'm not making sense. Maybe I need to explain a little bit more about that. Or she looks offended. Maybe I need to back it up a little bit and take it back. It can be happening that way, or it can be happening in the crafting of the story, in the pre-planning of the story, in terms of thinking about who is my audience, what do they care about, what do they know and what don't they know, how am I going to make this meaningful to them. I suppose that's co-creating too, in some sense, in a sort of pre-sense. I think that's what I mean by it. And then, of course, it can, in fact, literally be co-created, right? So we could be telling a story one sentence at a time where we're building it together. That sometimes happens in improv. We do a lot of work in organizations where we have a group of people literally co-creating a story. So we use storytelling as a visioning activity, or where we're saying, paint a picture of your vision where you want to be a year from now, or where it's a storytelling activity where you have word at a time creation of a story, or sentence at a time creation of a story.
Thank you. Thank you. I was one of those average schmoes who was also really bad at gym, and I started improv very late in my life. I was much older than my fellow students in the class, and I loved it. It was absolutely life-changing for me and has impacted all of my work. And I realize it's because of speaking and listening. What I would love you to do is sort of make a pitch to the other people who are listening, to encourage them to jump in as well as a playground or gym.
I started as an improviser because I was an actor, and I was a scripted actor, and I was a serious scripted actor. And my acting teachers kept saying, you're too smart to be an actor, which was a really stupid and unhelpful thing to say. What they meant was, you're too in your head, you're too intellectual, and you're blocking your impulses, and you're not trusting your intuition, and you're thinking too much inside yourself. You're not present enough with your partner. Luckily, serendipitously, I did not seek it out. An improv teacher named Terry Summer, who now runs a role-playing practice at Mount Sinai Hospital. At the time she was at Chicago City Limits, came to do a masterclass for a theater company I was in, and I discovered improv. When I started teaching improv, my students started saying to me, I wish my boss could interact with this improv principle of accepting and building with what exists the way we do. or I wish my team could listen and support each other the way we do here as improvisers in the room. Would you come and do a workshop? And I was like, okay, I'm an actor, I'm a starving actor, you have money. I guess so, if you think it would be useful, but I don't know about business. And ultimately, I went back and got a master's in organizational psychology because I didn't want to be selling snake oil, right? I wanted to see if there was anything there. And there was, and that's a whole other long conversation. I mean, of course, duh, now. But I had a lot of out of that program, I had a lot of very arcane, jargony, complicated ways of talking about the answer to your question about like the value of improv and why people should use it, and my sort of sales pitch of improv for business or improv for life. And I went to a client once, all prepped with that, to Kaiser Permanente, who wanted to train docs in physician-patient communication skills. And I gave them my whole spiel, and they said, okay, but that's great, but what about this idea that we're just, as human beings, we're just improvising all the time, and life is improv? And I was like, oh, right, yeah, that. Right, that too, yep. And I was like, boy, it was like, I don't know, I'd been in the field 10 years. I think I'd probably already written a book on improv and training. And I was like, right, duh, we're all improvising all the time. This is a little improvisational scene. A conversation is just a little improvisational scene. And when we are speaking to each other, when we're deciding how to show up in the world, we are just improvising, right? We are all performers. We are all performing all the time. And when I say that, I don't mean that we're being inauthentic. Sometimes we are, right? Sometimes we're authentic, sometimes we're inauthentic. Sometimes we're honest, sometimes we're not. Sometimes we're consciously being inauthentic, sometimes we're unconsciously unauthentic. Most of the time we act habitually in patterns. So what improv does, conscious improv training, I think, and what we try to bring to our clients, whether they're improv students or organizational clients, is two things. We help people expand their awareness of their performance choices, how they're showing up, what they're doing, and the impact it's having. And then, so that's the first thing, is their awareness. And then the second thing we help them do is expand their range of options, so that if and when their performance choices aren't aligned with their objectives, they have a wider range of options to choose from.
And you are continuing to improvise in your own career, your own trajectory, now you're doing podcasting. Can you tell me what you're learning about speaking and listening from playing in this new medium?
Yeah. I love the way that you asked the question, because in fact, our podcast journey we have allowed our podcast journey to be really improvisational. We started a year or so ago, and we knew that we didn't really know what we were doing. And we knew that we could spend some time studying and getting up to speed. And we did a little bit of preparation, of course, but we also knew that it was a skill as much as it was knowledge. And we decided to dive in and play and experiment and find what our podcast would be as we went along, and learn as we played, and then iterate. So we're in our second season of the podcast. It's called Dare to Be Human. And the theme, or the thesis, is that we're going to look at stories from our lives and our guests' lives, of those moments in life where we are taking the risk to expand our performance range or our performance options, where we are using the principles of improv in everyday life, and how do they show up? Sometimes explicitly, sometimes not. A lot of our guests are not improvisers at all. But how does it look in real life, and how does it show up? The way it's evolved is we start with a dare to be human story. What's a moment when we connected in a new way or tried a performance in a new way, and then sort of unpack the interview from there. I guess what I'm discovering about speaking and listening is I'm interested right now in exploring the relationship between authenticity and habit. And I think the two concepts get conflated and mistaken for each other. I think sometimes we use the excuse that something isn't authentic to us to protect ourselves from having to step out of our comfort zone and let go of an old habit that isn't working for us, or just an old way of doing something, or try on a new way of doing something. So I'll use a very mundane example, but if I have a habitual way of standing, like I used to, when I started acting class, I used to stand on one foot with my hands on my hip in a kind of funny, sort of, I could stand up and show you, but right, like a funny way of, a sort of very off balance, kind of teenager, kind of cocky way of standing. And that was my habit. And I could have taken the stance that, well, that's my authentic way of standing, as opposed to learning to stand in a neutral way, right? Or my authentic voice could be like this. And I could say, well, this is my authentic voice. But if it's not serving me for this to be my authentic voice, I can also learn how to breathe, and support my voice and, relax my throat. And is that inauthentic to learn how to breathe and relax my throat? Or is that just learning a skill? So there's some skills you need to learn for podcasting. Like not to interrupt while the other person's talking and leave some space for them, or how to ask an effective question. And yeah. So I'm interested in exploring that.
You've got me thinking a lot about authenticity and habit, and I'm going to continue thinking about this. Thank you very much for that. Anything else on speaking and listening that you've been reflecting on that you'd like to share?
Listening is, I think listening is such an incredibly powerful superpower. I think I already called it a superpower once. And we don't learn about it in school. I'm sure most of your guests, I'm guessing a lot of your guests may have talked about this. We increasingly are getting skill training on speaking. I know my daughter now in school, who is 16, has a class in speaking. And I think people do take, presentation skills courses now. Listening is a muscle that you can exercise, we believe. It's a set of skills. It's not just one skill. I think it's many skills. Oh, I think it's very hard. I think good listening is much, much more difficult than we think it is. I think humans are architecturally built to be terrible listeners. We are not built to be good at listening and connecting. In many different ways, there are barriers to good listening. And it's not just skill-based. I think there are just all sorts of architectural problems. And it's a practice for us, for me personally, and it's interesting to feel like it's something that I personally and we professionally value so highly, and that we spend so much time thinking about and so much time practicing, and it still feels so out of our grasp to really, really be great at, which is maybe why we're so fascinated by it. Because, you know, I still go home to my husband, who also spends his life practicing this, and we can have terrible conversations where we're like, "You're not listening to me." Like, so it's hard, and it's great that you're doing this, because it's a, you know, it's a life's work.